You scan the horizon from one end of the blue expanse to the other. There is nothing. No glint of sun on a canopy, no contrail, no distant speck of black. Your radar screen is clear. Your sensors are silent. You are completely, totally alone. And then your world explodes. You never saw it. You never heard it. The first and only sign that you were in a fight was the moment you lost it. The hunter that killed you simply wasn't there. This is not science fiction. This is the battlefield created by one machine. A machine designed not just to win a dogfight, but to make the fight so one-sided it could hardly be called a fight at all. It is a 20-ton cathedral of steel, titanium, and classified composites, engineered to be a ghost. A machine that can fly faster than the speed of sound without ever lighting its afterburners, that can see enemies from hundreds of miles away, and that can outmaneuver any aircraft that dares to challenge it. This is the story of the Lockheed Martin F-22 Raptor. It is a story of impossible ambition, of technological leaps that bordered on magic. A story of a weapon so powerful, it was born at the exact moment its purpose vanished. It's a story of political warfare, of astronomical costs, and of a fatal compromise that left the world's greatest air force with a fleet of silver bullets, but perhaps not enough of them to win the war. To understand this apex predator, we must go back. Back to a time when the world was split in two, and the skies of Europe were the potential flashpoint for World War III. The late 1970s and early 1980s. The United States Air Force reigned supreme. Its champion was the McDonnell Douglas F-15 Eagle. The F-15 was, and still is, a legend. A purebred air superiority fighter with a staggering, undefeated combat record. For years, nothing could touch it. Then, in 1977, the balance began to shift. Western reconnaissance satellites, peering deep into the Soviet Union, spotted new shapes at a secret test airfield near Ramenskoye. The grainy images revealed something alarming. A large twin-tailed fighter that was sleek, powerful, and looked unsettlingly similar to their own F-15. This was the prototype of what NATO would soon call the flanker, the Sukhoi Su-27. At the same time, another smaller twin-tailed fighter emerged, the MiG-29 Fulcrum. When these aircraft were revealed to the West, the Pentagon was stunned. The new Soviet fighters were not the clumsy, second-rate machines they had come to expect. They were fast, powerful, and, most terrifyingly, super-maneuverable. The Su-27 could perform a dynamic braking maneuver, the Pugachev's Cobra, that Western engineers had deemed aerodynamically impossible. Suddenly, the F-15, the king of the sky, had a rival. In simulations, the new Soviet superfighters were a match or even a superior to the best the West had to offer. The Air Force realized that air superiority was not a permanent title. It had to be re-earned. And it had to be re-earned with a technological leap so profound it would slam the door on the Soviets for a generation. They needed something that didn't just match the flanker. They needed something that would make the flanker obsolete before it ever fired a shot. In 1981, the U.S. Air Force formally issued a request for information for an Advanced Tactical Fighter, ATF. The list of requirements was not just ambitious, it was borderline fantasy. The Air Force demanded a jet that could combine four seemingly contradictory abilities. First, stealth. Not just reduced radar signature like the F-117 Nighthawk, which was a slow, lumbering bomber. This had to be an agile, frontline fighter that was, for all intents and purposes, invisible to enemy radar. Second, Supercruise. The ability to fly at supersonic speeds above Mach 1 without using its fuel-guzzling afterburners. An F-15 could go supersonic for a few minutes. The ATF needed to live there, cruising at Mach 1.5 or more, allowing it to choose every engagement, intercepting targets or escaping danger at will. Third, extreme agility. It had to be able to outturn, outclimb, and outfight not just the F-15, but the hyper-agile Su-27. It needed to dominate the close-in knife fight. And fourth, integrated avionics. All of its revolutionary sensors had to be fused into one seamless God's eye view for the pilot, allowing them to manage the entire battle space, not just fly the plane. This was the unholy trinity of fifth-generation warfare: stealth, supercruise, and agility. No one had ever combined them. Many said it couldn't be done. The challenge was laid down. The titans of American aerospace answered. The Air Force selected 2 teams to build flying prototypes. In one corner, Northrop and McDonnell Douglas. Northrop were the masters of unconventional design. They were the secret builders of the B-2 Spirit stealth bomber and the YF-17, the acrobatic ancestor of the FA-18 Hornet. Their entry was the YF-23, Black Widow II. In the other corner, Lockheed, Boeing, and General Dynamics. Lockheed was the undisputed king of black projects. Their legendary Skunk Works division had created the U-2, the SR-71 Blackbird, and the F-117. Their entry was the YF-22. This was more than a contract. It was a battle of engineering philosophies. The Northrop YF-23 was a machine of pure, terrifying speed and stealth. It was sleek, alien, and beautiful. Its 2 engines were buried deep in the fuselage to hide their heat. Its tail fins were splayed out in a V shape, a radical design to minimize its radar cross-section. The YF-23 was an assassin's blade, designed to be the stealthiest and fastest of the 2. It was rumored to have hit Mach 1.6 in Supercruise, a speed that remains classified but is spoken of in awed whispers. The Lockheed YF-22, by contrast, looked more conventional. It looked like a fighter, but its secret weapon was hidden at the back. It was equipped with the new Pratt & Whitney YF-119 engines, which featured something revolutionary: 2-dimensional thrust vectoring nozzles. The nozzles on the YF-22 could move up and down independently, directing the engine's massive thrust. This gave the YF-22 an ability to pitch and turn with a violence that defied the laws of physics. It could perform maneuvers at high angles of attack that would cause any other fighter to stall and fall out of the sky. The stage was set for one of the greatest fly-offs in aviation history. Throughout 1990, the 2 prototypes were pushed to their limits at Edwards Air Force Base, deep in the California desert. The YF-23 was the stealth-first approach. It was faster in a straight line and almost certainly had a smaller radar signature. Its pilots said it was an incredibly stable, high-performance machine. The YF-22 was the agility-first approach. Its test pilots put on a dazzling show, demonstrating its thrust vectoring power. In one legendary display, a YF-22 test pilot pulled the aircraft up to a 60-degree angle of attack, practically standing it on its tail, and still maintained full control. It was a dogfighter's dream. The Air Force was faced with an impossible choice: the YF-23, a stealthy supersonic missileer, or the YF-22, a stealthy, hyper-agile brawler. On April 23, 1991, the Air Force announced its decision. The winner of the Advanced Tactical Fighter competition was the YF-22. Air Force Secretary Donald Rice, in his announcement, stated the YF-22 team offered clearly better capability with lower cost. thereby providing the Air Force with a true best value. The Lockheed team had not only won with their airframe, but their engine partner, Pratt & Whitney, also won with the F-119.
A team involving both Air Force and Navy personnel included not only the developer community, but users, testers, contracts experts, cost analysts, and all who would be involved in the next phase of development. The success of the demonstration validation phase and this formal evaluation process is also demonstrated by the fact that the evaluators were able to bring to me as the source selection authority 4 awardable contracts, each of which represented acceptable proposals that met Air Force requirements. However, in evaluating the engine and airframe proposals, one combination clearly offered better capability with lower cost, thereby providing the Air Force with a true best value. With all that said, I now announce that the ATF team will be composed of the Pratt & Whitney company who designed the F-119 engine, which will be integrated into the F-22, designed by Lockheed, team with Boeing and General Dynamics.
Why did the YF-22 win? The YF-23 was an incredible machine, and many insiders still debate the choice to this day. But the Air Force felt Lockheed's design was a less risky proposition. Its thrust vectoring was a known quantity, a clear evolutionary step. The YF-23's radical stealth design was perhaps a leap too far, with some concerns about its manufacturing complexity. Lockheed's team, led by the legendary Skunk Works, had also projected more confidence in their management and cost estimates. They hadn't just built a prototype, they had proven they could build the future. The YF-23 Black Widow II was retired to museums, becoming one of aviation's most tantalizing what-ifs. And the YF-22 now had to be forged from a mere prototype into the most complex weapon ever created. It would be given a new name, the F-22 Raptor. The development process would be a 15-year odyssey of technological triumph, software nightmares, and a political storm that would threaten to kill the program before it ever flew its first mission. The ghost was about to be born, but it was being born into a world that was changing faster than its circuits could be wired. Low observability. We call it stealth. Stealth is not a single technology, it's a fanatical design philosophy. It's a symphony of shapes, materials, and emissions control, all working to achieve one goal: to shrink the F-22's radar cross-section from the size of a barn door to the size of a steel marble. It starts with the shape. Look at the Raptor. Every edge, every angle is deliberate. The leading edges of the wings are aligned at the same angle as the V of the twin tails. The edges of the engine intakes match the edges of the tail planes. This is called planform alignment. A conventional fighter is a mess of random angles, vertical tails, round nozzles, antennas, and pylons, all of which act like perfect mirrors, scattering a radar signal back to its source from every direction. The F-22 is the opposite. It is meticulously designed to catch an incoming radar wave and reflect it away in just a few very narrow, very specific directions. As long as an enemy radar isn't in one of those tiny spike zones, the radar pulse is sent off into empty space. The receiver gets back nothing. But shaping isn't enough. The skin of the F-22 is a classified marvel in itself. It's coated in layers of radar-absorbent material, or RAM. These top-secret coatings and composites are designed to absorb radar energy, converting it into a tiny, harmless amount of heat rather than reflecting it. Every single detail is an obsession. The cockpit canopy is coated in a thin, near-transparent film of gold, not for looks, but to shield the complex shapes of the pilot's helmet and cockpit instruments from radar waves. Every screw, every panel, every access door has serrated, saw-tooth edges to scatter radar waves. And most importantly, no weapons. An F-15 is a Christmas tree of bombs and missiles hanging from its wings, each one a flashing neon sign to an enemy radar. The F-22's entire payload is carried internally. When it's time to fight, massive weapons bay doors snap open. The missiles are launched on hydraulic arms in less than a second, and the doors snap shut, returning the jet to its pristine, invisible shape. This isn't just about radar, it's about heat. The Raptor's two-dimensional thrust vectoring nozzles aren't just for agility. Their flat, slotted shape helps to mix the scorching engine exhaust with cold ambient air, masking its infrared signature. The engines themselves are buried so deep within the fuselage, an infrared sensor can't get a direct view of the turbine core. The F-22 is a ghost. The second pillar, power. To achieve the impossible requirement of Supercruise, Lockheed needed an impossible engine. Pratt & Whitney delivered the F-119 PW-100. This engine is, in a word, a monster. Each one can produce 35,000 pounds of thrust with its afterburner engaged. The Raptor has two. This gives it a thrust-to-weight ratio greater than 1:1, allowing it to climb straight up, accelerating as if gravity were a rumor. But the true magic is what it does without the afterburner. An afterburner is like pouring raw fuel into a jet's exhaust. It gives a massive burst of power, but at a horrific fuel cost. For a fourth-generation fighter, it's an emergency-only sprint button. The F-119 engine is so advanced, so efficient at its core, that it can push the 60,000-pound Raptor past the speed of sound, reportedly as high as Mach 1.8, on military power alone. This is Supercruise. This one ability fundamentally changes the rules of air combat. The F-22 dictates the terms of every single fight. It can intercept any target, it can escape any threat. It can arrive at the battle, fire its missiles, and be gone. All before a conventional F-15 has even decided to light its afterburner. And then there's the agility. Those 2D thrust vectoring nozzles at the back can move up or down by 20 degrees in an instant. This allows the pilot to point the nose of the jet in a different direction than the jet is traveling. It can perform physics-defying maneuvers like the J-turn, decelerating and changing direction with a cobra-like quickness that no opponent can follow. A test pilot in a dogfight against an F-15 famously said the F-22's maneuverability was so superior, it was like having a club-to-club fight, but the other guy has a machine gun. The final pillar is the one that truly makes the F-22 a fifth-generation killer. It's not the body, it's the brain. The F-22 was the first fighter to truly achieve sensor fusion. In an F-15, the pilot is an orchestra conductor. They have to manage a radar screen, a separate electronic warfare display, a navigation pod, and a data link. They must read all these separate instruments and manually, in their own mind, build a picture of the battlefield, all while pulling 9 Gs and trying not to get shot. The F-22 pilot is a god. The Raptor's brain is made of 2 massive computers called Common Integrated Processors, or CIPs. These computers take in all the information from all the sensors and fuse it into one single intuitive picture. The centerpiece is the Northrop Grumman AN/APG-77 radar. This was one of the world's first AESA, or Active Electronically Scanned Array radars. Instead of a mechanical dish gimbaling back and forth, the APG-77 is a flat, stationary array of over 1,900 tiny transmit-receive modules. This means it can scan the sky at nearly the speed of light tracking dozens of targets at once in multiple directions. It's also a low probability of intercept radar. It's so precise, it can send a narrow pencil beam of energy at a target, get a track, and then change its frequency thousands of times per second, all before the target's radar warning receiver even knows it's being painted. But that's just the start. The F-22's entire airframe is a sensor. The AN/ALR-94 electronic warfare system has 30 antennas embedded in the wings and fuselage, constantly tasting the electronic spectrum. It can detect, identify, and geolocate an enemy radar signal from over 250 miles away, without ever making a sound. A Raptor pilot can see an enemy aircraft on their display long before their own radar is even in range. All this data, from the radar, from the passive ALR-94, from an allied data link, is fused by the CIPs. On the pilot's cockpit display, an enemy fighter isn't a blip. It's a single red triangle. A friendly is a blue circle. An unknown is a yellow square. The pilot doesn't have to work to understand the battlefield. They just know. This is the source of the F-22's motto: first look, first shot, first kill. But this revolution was a nightmare to build. On September 7, 1997, the first production representative F-22, tail number 4001, named Raptor 01, took to the skies over Marietta, Georgia. It was a triumphant moment, but it was already 3 months late. The flight had been delayed by fuel tank leaks and software bugs. It was a sign of things to come. The F-22 was arguably the most complex project human beings had ever attempted, second only to the Apollo program, and it was collapsing under its own weight. The first crisis was the end of the Cold War. The day the YF-22 was declared the winner in 1991, its entire purpose, to fight a Soviet superfighter, had evaporated. Suddenly, this world-beating weapon was a solution in search of a problem. As the 1990s wore on, the Pentagon's focus shifted from great power conflict to counterinsurgency in the Balkans and the Middle East. Congress, eager for a peace dividend, looked at the F-22 and saw not a shield, but a giant gold-plated sinkhole. The cuts began. The original plan for 750 Raptors was slashed to 648 in 1991, then to 442 in 1994. This created a cost-death spiral. The F-22's development was astronomically expensive, over $30 billion in research alone. When that cost was spread over 750 planes, the price was high. When it was spread over 442, the price for each individual jet became horrifying. Then came the technical problems. The U.S. General Accounting Office began releasing a series of scathing reports. The F-22's revolutionary avionics were unstable. The computers would suffer unexpected shutdowns. The program hit a software crisis. The F-22's 2 million lines of code were the most complex ever written for an aircraft. But the processors chosen to run them, the Intel i960, were already obsolete by the time Raptor 01 flew, forcing a hideously expensive redesign. The physical airframe was fighting back too. Testers discovered violent buffeting of the vertical tails at high speeds, forcing a structural redesign. Portions of the aircraft were overheating. The precious stealth coatings proved to be a maintenance disaster, peeling and degrading under rain and sun. By the early 2000s, the program was years behind schedule and billions over budget. The original goal of a $35 million flyaway cost had become a joke. The real number was climbing past $150 million per plane. The F-22 was a technological marvel, an undisputed king of the sky. But on the ground, In the halls of the Pentagon and Congress, it was bleeding to death. It had been designed to win a war against a superpower, but it was now in a new, desperate fight against its own accountants. The F-22 Raptor was a god in the sky, but on Earth it was a political pariah. As the 2000s began, the F-22 was trapped in a perfect storm. The development nightmare of the 90s had sent its price tag into the stratosphere. The official flyaway cost was pegged at $150 million per jet. But when the massive research and development bill was factored in, the program acquisition unit cost was soaring past $350 million. At the same time, the United States was now fully engaged in the global war on terror. The enemy was no longer a Soviet pilot in a superfighter. The enemy was an insurgent with a cell phone and an IED. The skies over Iraq and Afghanistan were completely uncontested. The Air Force was flying 30-year-old A-10s and F-16s, which were perfectly capable of the mission. The question in Washington became toxic. Why are we spending hundreds of billions on a stealth fighter to fight an enemy that doesn't have an Air Force? The Raptor's supporters, mainly Air Force leadership, argued for the long view. General T. Michael Mosley, Air Force Chief of Staff, argued passionately, "If you don't have air superiority, you're dead. It's not a question of if, it's a question of how long." They warned that while America was bogged down in the desert, China and Russia were aggressively developing their own fifth-generation rivals, the J-20 and Su-57. To stop building the F-22, they argued, would be to invite a future catastrophe. But the program had a second self-inflicted wound. In 1998, Congress had passed a single sentence buried deep in a massive appropriations bill. It became known as the Obey Amendment, named for its author, Representative David Obey. This amendment flatly banned the export of the F-22 to any foreign government. The logic was simple. The F-22's technology, particularly its stealth and its sensor fusion, was such a profound national secret that it simply could not be trusted to anyone, not even America's closest allies. Japan, Australia, and Israel all expressed profound interest in buying the Raptor, but the door was slammed shut. This ban was a fatal blow. Without foreign sales to help absorb the cost, the very model that would later make the F-35 program viable, the U.S. government was left holding the entire $67 billion bill. The F-22 was now in a golden cage, too secret to sell and too expensive to buy. The final executioner arrived in 2009. His name was Robert Gates, the new Secretary of Defense. Gates was a pragmatist, brought in to manage two grinding ground wars. He saw a military that was unbalanced, overinvested in exquisite high-tech weapons for a conventional war, and desperately under-equipped for the wars it was actually fighting. And to him, the F-22 was the prime symbol of that dysfunction. On April 6, 2009, Secretary Gates stepped up to a Pentagon podium and lowered the axe. He announced his recommendation to end F-22 production at 187 aircraft.
For me, it was not a close call. And the basic conclusion was that, first of all, we have fulfilled program. I mean, it's not like we're killing the F-22. We will have 187 of them. The 183 of that has been the program of record, as I recall, since 2005. So we are completing the F-22 program. And the military advice that I got was that there is no military requirement for numbers of F-22s beyond 187.
Air Force advice, so they've been badgering you with all sorts of analysis that they need 60 more.
That was their advice as well.
It was their advice as well that,
yes,
that you didn't need more than 187?
Yes.
Really? Okay.
The original plan for 750 jets was dead. The Air Force's desperate plea for a bare minimum of 381 was denied. The number would be 187 and no more. He argued that the F-22 was a luxury the country could no longer afford. He needed that money for drones, for surveillance aircraft, for armored vehicles to protect troops in Afghanistan. He would, he said, champion the other fifth-generation fighter, the F-35. It was less capable in a pure dogfight, but it was designed from the start to be a multi-role jack-of-all-trades, and critically, it was exportable. The Air Force was apoplectic. Congress fought, but the tide had turned. Gates, with the backing of the new Obama administration, won the fight. In 2011, the last F-22, tail number 4195, rolled off the Lockheed Martin assembly line in Marietta, Georgia. The jigs and tools used to build the world's most advanced fighter were packed up and put into storage. The world's greatest fighter was, officially, an endangered species. But the Raptor's troubles were far from over. As the small fleet of 187 jets began their operational life, a new, more terrifying problem emerged. A ghost. Not on the radar, but inside the cockpit. Pilots began reporting strange, insidious symptoms: dizziness, confusion, memory lapses, a persistent hacking cough that became known as the Raptor cough. These were the classic signs of hypoxia, oxygen deprivation. Then, on November 16, 2010, tragedy struck. Captain Jeffrey Haney, flying a night training mission out of Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson in Alaska, reported that his jet was not functioning properly. Then, his communications went silent. His F-22, flying at nearly Mach 1.8, slammed into the frozen Alaskan wilderness. Captain Haney was killed instantly. The investigation was a firestorm. The Air Force initially pointed to pilot error, but Haney's family and fellow pilots pushed back, pointing to the known oxygen deprivation issues. The investigation found that Haney's onboard oxygen generation system, or OBOGS, had failed, cutting off his air. The problem was systemic. By 2011, the reports of hypoxia-like symptoms were spiking. Pilots were becoming disoriented in the air. This wasn't a software bug. This was a life-or-death crisis. On May 3, 2011, the Air Force did the unthinkable. It grounded its entire multi-billion-dollar F-22 fleet. The world's apex predator was now a hangar queen, by order of its own commanders. A massive investigation involving NASA and a host of civilian experts tore the jet apart. They searched for a smoking gun, a single failed part. They found nothing. Or rather, they found everything. There was no single cause. It was a collage of issues. The onboard oxygen generation system was one problem, but the real culprit was a piece of pilot equipment, the upper pressure garment. This vest was designed to inflate during high-G maneuvers to help the pilot breathe. But a faulty valve was causing the vest to remain inflated even in normal flight. It was, quite literally, slowly squeezing the pilots, preventing their lungs from fully expanding. They were suffocating, G-force by G-force, in their own cockpits. After a grueling 4-month stand-down, a solution was found. The faulty valve was replaced, filters were removed, and a new automatic backup oxygen system was installed. The fleet returned to the sky in September 2011. The ghost in the cockpit had finally been exorcised. The Raptor was, at last, cleared for combat. It was just in time, because the world it was built for was suddenly back. For nearly a decade, the F-22 was a king without a kingdom. It had entered service on December 15, 2005, declared initially operationally capable, and assigned to the 27th Fighter Squadron at Langley Air Force Base. Its first operational missions were flying air defense patrols over the U.S. as part of Operation Noble Eagle. But in the skies over Iraq and Afghanistan, it was absent. The F-22 was deemed overkill, too valuable to risk, and too specialized for dropping bombs on insurgents. Instead, the Raptor proved its lethality in the simulated skies over the Nevada desert. At exercises like Red Flag and Northern Edge, the F-22's performance was not just dominant, it was terrifying. In its first major exercise, Northern Edge 2006, the F-22s flew against a massive force of F-15, F-16, and F/A-18 acting as the enemy. The final kill ratio was 144 to 0. In later exercises, the numbers became almost comical, 241 to 2. The Red Air pilots, the best in the U.S. Navy and Air Force, reported a deeply unsettling experience. They would fly their mission, staring into an empty sky, only to hear over the radio, "You're dead. You're dead. You're dead." They never even knew a Raptor was in the same sky. The F-22 was without a doubt the greatest air-to-air fighter ever built. But it had never fired a shot in anger. That all changed on the night of September 22, 2014. The target was not a Soviet airbase. It was a command and control building for the terrorist group ISIS in Raqqa, Syria. The mission was Operation Inherent Resolve. After nearly 9 years in service, the F-22 was finally going to war. But it wasn't for the reason anyone expected. That night, F-22 Raptors slipped across the Syrian border and did something no other plane could. Yes, they dropped their own weapons, precision 1,000-pound GBU-32 JDAM bombs, but that wasn't their primary role. The skies over Syria were one of the most dangerous places on Earth, defended by a dense network of Russian-made surface-to-air missiles. It was a place where a fourth-generation fighter, like an F-16, would be in mortal danger. For the F-22, it was a hunting ground. The Raptors flew in first, completely invisible to Syrian radar. They used their powerful AN/ALR-94 passive sensors to sniff out every enemy radar, every SAM battery, and every potential threat. They used their APG-77 AESA radar to build a perfect, high-fidelity map of the entire battlefield. They became the electronic quarterback for the entire strike. Flying invisibly among the enemy, the F-22 pilots could see everything. They could see the F-15s and B-1 bombers in their strike package. They could see the Syrian air defense radars that were searching for them in vain. And they could see the ISIS targets on the ground. A U.S. Air Force general described the mission. The F-22 pilots would calmly direct the other fighters, their voices coming over the radio like a god. "Okay, Strike Eagle, you're cleared in. Your target is on your nose. Be aware you have a Syrian SAM system looking at you from your left. Don't worry, I see it. It does not see you. You are clear to fire." This was the true power of fifth-generation warfare. The F-22 wasn't just a fighter. It was a stealthy, all-seeing sensor node that made the entire fourth-generation fleet survivable and more lethal. It had finally been blooded, and in doing so, it revealed its true purpose. For the next decade, the Raptor became the silver bullet of the Air Force. A small, priceless fleet of 180-odd jets, deployed in small numbers to hotspots in Europe to deter Russia, and to the Pacific to deter China. It was an invisible deterrent, a ghost that kept the peace. But it still had not one single confirmed air-to-air kill. Then, in early 2023, the strangest battle of the 21st century began. On January 28th, a high-altitude object was detected entering U.S. airspace over the Aleutian Islands. It was a massive white balloon, the size of 3 school buses, flying at 60,000 feet, well above all commercial air traffic. The Chinese government claimed it was a civilian weather balloon. The U.S. government knew it was a spy. The balloon slowly, brazenly drifted across the entire continental United States, passing over sensitive military sites, including Malmstrom Air Force Base, home to America's ICBMs. The Pentagon faced a problem. They couldn't shoot it down over land. The debris field would be massive. They had to wait, and they had to choose the right weapon. The F-15 and F-16 couldn't comfortably operate at that extreme altitude. There was only one jet for the job. On February 4, 2023, as the balloon drifted off the coast of South Carolina, the order was given. An F-22 Raptor, call sign Frank 01, from the 1st Fighter Wing at Langley, the F-22's very first operational wing, ascended to the stratosphere. The pilot climbed to 58,000 feet, just below the target. At 2:39 p.m. Eastern Time, Frank 01 fired a single AIM-9X Sidewinder missile. The missile, designed for high-G dogfights, streaked upward, its infrared seeker locking onto the balloon's minuscule heat signature. The world watched on brainy cell phone videos as the missile found its mark, and the balloon, the symbol of a new superpower rivalry, was torn apart. The irony was historic. The F-22 Raptor, the $400 million apex predator, the hyper-maneuverable dogfighter built to slay the Soviet Union's best, had finally, after 26 years, achieved its first official air-to-air kill against a balloon. In the days that followed, F-22s would shoot down 3 more unidentified aerial objects over North America, proving that the Raptor was the undisputed master of the high-altitude domain. Today, the F-22 Raptor is in a new and final phase of its life. It is no longer the new kid on the block. It is the veteran, the Golden Fleet. That small, finite number, just 187 built, means every single airframe is now a priceless, irreplaceable national asset. The fleet is split. The Air Force has for years tried to retire its 32 oldest Block 20 models. These are the training jets, which lack the advanced combat systems of the main fleet. Lieutenant General Richard Moore of the Air Force stated bluntly in 2023 that they will never be a part of the combat force. They don't have the most modern communications. They don't shoot the most modern weapons. The Air Force wants to scrap them to free up billions of dollars to fund its next secret fighter, the Next Generation Air Dominance, or NGAD program. But Congress has repeatedly, forcefully said no. With the rise of China's own J-20 stealth fighter, lawmakers argue that the U.S. cannot afford to lose a single 5th-generation airframe, even a subpar one. The battle is no longer about saving money. It's about preserving a dwindling advantage. The current plan is to upgrade even these old jets for combat, and the main fleet is getting deadlier. The F-22 is now the bridge to the 6th generation. It's being upgraded with new low-drag fuel tanks and stealthy pods carrying an infrared search and track, or IRST, system. This is a critical upgrade, allowing the F-22 to passively hunt other stealth aircraft by their heat signature. Its weapons bays are being modified to carry the AIM-260, a new longer-range air-to-air missile designed specifically to outrange the best weapons China has. The F-22 is now the quarterback for its younger, more numerous sibling, the F-35. The F-35 is the multi-role workhorse. The F-22 is the pure killer. Together, they are the 1-2 punch of American air power. The story of the F-22 Raptor is not a simple one. It has no clear-cut beginning, or a clean, heroic ending. It is a story of contradictions. It was designed for a superpower war that ended the moment it was born. It was a technological miracle that was crippled by its own complexity. It was the most dominant fighter in history, yet it was canceled for being too dominant, too advanced, and too expensive. It is an air-to-air killer whose only confirmed kills are balloons. And yet none of that matters, because the F-22's true legacy is not in its combat record. Its legacy is in the wars it prevented. It is the club-to-club fight where the other guy has a machine gun. For 2 decades, the F-22 has been the 180-odd-ton elephant in the room. Its very existence has been a checkmate, a deterrent so profound that no sane adversary has dared to challenge the sky where it flies. As General Mark Kelly, the former head of Air Combat Command, said, "We don't just want to compete in the high-end fight. We want to dominate it. The F-22 gives us the ability to own the sky." Its second legacy is that it wrote the textbook. The F-22 defined the 5th generation. That unholy trinity of stealth, supercruise, and sensor fusion. That was the F-22's invention. Every advanced fighter program on Earth since, Russia's Su-57, China's J-20, and even America's own F-35, is a direct response to the Raptor. They are all, in their own way, just trying to catch the ghost. The F-22's sensor fusion, once a software nightmare, is now the central principle of all modern warfare. That God's eye view the Raptor gave its pilot is the same concept that now guides the entire U.S. military. Former Air Force Chief of Staff General John P. Jumper described it perfectly. He said the F-22's integrated avionics will revolutionize the way we do business. It sees the world, it fuses it, and it presents it to the pilot on a silver platter. It's a quantum leap. The Raptor's story is now in its twilight. It will fly for another decade, maybe 2, serving as the grizzled veteran, the bridge to the 6th generation. Its successor, the Next Generation Air Dominance, or NGAD, is already flying in secret, a product of the lessons, both triumphant and painful, learned from the F-22. The Raptor taught the Air Force that a small, exquisite silver bullet fleet is a strategic vulnerability. It taught them that stealth coatings must be maintainable. And it taught them that open architecture software is the only way to keep a fighter relevant for 50 years. The F-22 will be retired. Sometime in the 2030s, the last of the Golden Fleet will fly to the boneyard. But it will leave behind a legacy of absolute, undisputed, and unchallenged dominance. It was a machine built for a war that never came, but in doing so, it may have been the very thing that kept that war from ever starting. It was a weapon so advanced it broke the bank. It was a fighter so perfect it was deemed a failure by accountants, and a legend by pilots. It is the ghost in the sky, the king, the apex predator. It is the F-22 Raptor.
It was faster. It was stealthier. By some accounts, it was the most advanced tactical fighter the world had ever seen. Designed in the shadows of a secret war, it was built to dominate the skies and ensure air supremacy for a generation. Yet, it lost.
The competitor, of course, in military was the Soviet Union. And they had a lot of good design teams, many of them, working on fighter airplanes. The Soviets could develop fighter airplanes, were capable of defeating ours in the sky. And that was enough for the Air Force to say, we better take a bold step forward with the next airplane.
This is the story of a machine that narrowly escaped the boneyard, a ghost of aviation history that now rests in silent glory. It's a factual account of human ingenuity, pride, and sacrifice by an elite team that built a seemingly invincible weapon. A team that, only after the project was cancelled, was granted clearance to finally tell their story.
Not a day was lost, and we were designing technology for B-2 and ATF together, side by side, daily.
This is the story of Northrop's YF-23 Black Widow II, a once highly classified secret. Our story begins during the height of the Cold War. At the time, the threat of mass destruction from a nuclear holocaust felt not just possible, but quite probable. Two superpowers were embroiled in an invisible conflict of arms escalation and the relentless pursuit of air superiority. With communist forces in Eastern Europe holding a 4-to-1 military advantage, there were legitimate concerns for the West's defense systems and the region's political stability. While the American F-15 Eagle held on to a slim advantage, the potential threat posed by swifter Soviet-built fighters like the MiG-29 and the advanced Su-27 flanker family posed a massive problem. If it was to counter the threat from the east, the United States and its aging air fleet needed a radical shift in aerial strategy. The first plan of action was the gathering of intelligence. The development costs to counter the threat were shared between the government and America's aerospace industries. DARPA's main priority was to implement the force multiplier concept. The Pentagon's ultimate strategic goal became low observability, the ability to fly undetected, now known as stealth. With the Pentagon's plan in place, the race for air superiority shifted into top gear. In the early 1980s, the Air Force began a concept development investigation, requesting proposals from the leading airframe companies for an advanced tactical fighter, or ATF. In 1983, 7 companies responded, but by 1986, the Pentagon had chosen only 2 winners, Northrop and Lockheed. They were contracted to develop 2 prototype aircraft, which would compete in a fly-off for a multi-billion-dollar government contract. The Pentagon also encouraged the other bidders to team up with either Northrop or Lockheed. For 50 years, Hawthorne, California-based Northrop had been a bold developer, designer, and supplier of high-performance aircraft, such as the F-5 and its legendary B-2 stealth bomber. Northrop teamed up with McDonnell Douglas, their longtime partner on the F-18 program, and a dominant fighter manufacturer that supplied the F-4 Phantom and the F-15 Eagle. Always an innovative company, Burbank, California-based Lockheed had been responsible for some of the most brilliant designs in the industry, including America's first jet fighter, the P-80, the U-2 spy plane, the SR-71, and the F-117 stealth fighter. Lockheed now teamed up with 2 formidable partners, Boeing, the giant commercial jet manufacturer, and General Dynamics, whose divisions designed submarines and tanks, as well as jet fighters. The histories of Lockheed and Northrop have been intertwined ever since Jack Northrop began his career with the Lockheed brothers in 1916. When he left to form his own company, the rivalry began, which continues even today. With more than $2 billion at stake, the capital risks were gigantic. 2 proud rivals were now locked in a contest to produce the most advanced tactical fighter the world had seen: Lockheed's YF-22 and Northrop's YF-23. Directives from the Pentagon were simple, yet required unprecedented advances in technology. First, the ATF had to be more maneuverable than the enemy. It had to fly supersonic without using a gas-guzzling afterburner, a capability known as Supercruise. It had to be low observable or invisible to enemy radar. It also had to be reliable and maintainable in adverse situations. If these other directives were met, they would ensure the final requirement: survivability. Their job was made even more complicated by the Pentagon's insistence that work would be designated top secret. Special access required. Sensitivity to national security required it to be a black program, codenamed Senior Sky. Del Jacobs was appointed as Northrop's first ATF program manager and swiftly formed a special team to meet the challenge. Bob Sandusky was assigned as chief engineer and principal architect of the YF-23. Drafted from the B-2 division to head the YF-23 technology team was expert physicist Yu-Ping Liu. Yet despite their cloak and dagger secrecy, those working in the black world developed an unexpected camaraderie. As team spirit flourished, the contest had just begun to take shape. Sandusky's team knew that their design would have to defeat the most potent weapon that can be used against a fighter: radio azimuth detecting and ranging signals, commonly known as radar. Ever since 1940, when it was first effectively utilized by the British against the German Luftwaffe, radar has been evolving into far more sophisticated forms. There is only one way to hide from radar. It's called stealth. Stealth is the ability of an object or weapon to appear invisible to all enemy sensors. Top secret research in ways to avoid radar detection has continued for decades. It was Northrop and Lockheed which developed the first experimental versions of stealth aircraft. Lockheed's Have Blue program was the forerunner to the F-117 stealth fighter. Northrop's basis for their B-2 stealth bomber was the Tacit Blue program. This intelligence-gathering aircraft was the first stealthy aircraft with curved aerodynamic surfaces and was developed in a program that was so highly classified that for many years, the Pentagon did not even acknowledge that it existed. The two competitors followed different paths in designing their own ATF versions. Lockheed's design followed in the tradition of their Have Blue and F-117 creations, with sharply angled surfaces. Northrop's ATF design took on the distinctive characteristics of its stealth heritage, the B-2 bomber. The B-2, with its flowing organic lines and radar-deflecting profile, has a strategic advantage over its opponents. But its specialized ability to handle only bombing missions required the Air Force to demand an ultimate stealth fighter. Throughout the 8-year development of the YF-23, stealth techniques were being continuously tested and refined. The shape of the plane was determined by radar and wind tunnel tests. During one type of radar test, the aircraft model was placed on a pole and its cross-section illuminated with various high-frequency radar signals. Its radar cross-section, or RCS, was then measured and the data utilized in the design process. These tests were conducted at night at a secret location in the California desert, under cover from overhead satellite surveillance. Early in the program, during one such RCS test, the YF-23 first acquired the name Black Widow. The original Black Widow, Northrop's P-61, was built during World War II. It was a night fighter, fitted with the first ever radar-guided gun system, painted gloss black to deflect enemy searchlights. Since that time, the Black Widow has become legendary among aviation enthusiasts. Two separate prototypes of the YF-22 and of the YF-23 were built for the ATF program. These prototype air vehicles were designated PAV-1 and PAV-2. PAV-1 was powered with a Pratt & Whitney engine, and General Electric supplied the engine for PAV-2. The two engine companies were locked in their own fly-off competition for engine selection. Their goal? To build an engine that could fly at sustained supercruise speeds. The two massive engines produced 70,000 pounds of sea-level thrust, which, at maximum flight speed, produced more than 40,000 horsepower, nearly that of a Navy destroyer. The jet exhaust was also vulnerable to heat-seeking missiles. To lower the heat signature, an ingenious exhaust liner was designed, which cooled engine emissions from detection. The liner tiles, while similar in purpose to those found on the space shuttle, were far more complex and labor-intensive. Each one was meticulously installed by hand. All the operating functions were controlled by the Black Widow 2's unique avionics system. Its supercomputer, or core processor, performed numerous avionic functions, including radar, navigation, performance data, and situational awareness. Another important function was flight control. The central computer made the necessary flight corrections as the pilot flew the aircraft, a technique called fly-by-wire. The core processor was the YF-23's central nervous system. It was regarded as the most advanced for its era because it provided all the data in real time, performing an astounding 5 to 6 billion operations per second, compared to an IBM mainframe of the time running at a mere 400 million operations per second. The challenge for the engineering team was to integrate the computer system and its auxiliary components into the Black Widow 2's overall design package without affecting its maneuverability, the ability to supercruise, or its stealth signature. To ensure its smooth-flowing design, the Black Widow 2 was actually built from the outside in, which, in effect, was like building a plane backwards. To reduce the airplane's weight, covering the airframe was a unique graphite-based composite material, lighter than aluminum and capable of sustained supersonic flight. While Northrop pioneered the use of composites, they hadn't been used this extensively until PAV-1. Though Northrop and McDonnell Douglas produced the airframe, they relied on a network of specialized subcontractors who created the internal components, like the computers, actuators, and radar systems. There were now 10,000 people in 30 different states working in complete secrecy on the project. The ATF program was an immense undertaking. Building the plane from scratch generated a massive amount of test data, calculations, statistics, and reports. The paperwork alone was colossal. When a fighter is not in combat, it is still vulnerable to natural hazards. To alleviate the problem of bird strikes, Northrop turned to their specialist subcontractors. The challenge was to fabricate a specially coated radar deflective canopy, which was thin enough to be optically perfect, yet thick enough to withstand a bird strike at 400 knots. The common method of testing the canopy is to fire a 4-pound raw chicken from a high-velocity air cannon at it. But a 3/4 of an inch thick, unbreakable polycarbonate canopy absorbs the awesome forces of impact. Before the assemblies were installed in the prototypes, the major systems had to be tested. This was accomplished with the Iron Bird, a metal frame where the electrical and hydraulic systems could be laid out in exact detail and verified. At the controls were veteran test pilots Paul Metz and Jim Sandberg. But Metz faced a problem the first time he operated the simulator. He was to crash 75 more times in the simulator before the design was perfected. Metz and Sandberg, like most test pilots, were a breed apart. The simulator program was, in many respects, the most costly part of the ATF budget. Utilizing computer models, the test pilots simulated wargames and recreated combat situations, pitting the computerized version of PAV-1 against the best Soviet MiGs and American fighters. PAV-1 beat them all, hands down. But the success was overshadowed by a new set of problems. After 3 years, the financial stakes brought new pressures, but the team pushed on. With 20,000 hours logged in the simulators, the test pilots and engineers felt they were now ready to take their show out to the desert. 100 miles northeast of Los Angeles, on a desolate dry lakebed, lies Edwards Air Force Base, home to more historic aviation test exploits than any other test facility on the planet. The base was named after Captain Glenn Edwards, a test pilot killed while flying Northrop's original flying wing. Chuck Yeager smashed the sound barrier here in 1947, and it has also served as test headquarters for the successful B-2 stealth bomber program. In secretive nightly operations to elude overhead spy satellites, huge sections of the aircraft were hauled under armed guard to the base. There, a 125-member flight test crew assembled and tested, while thousands worked in support. In the early hours of June 22, 1990, the Black Widow 2 was finally completed. But moments before the scheduled rollout, Bob Sandusky was forced to apply some stealth interference of his own when an Air Force general wanted to carry out a last-minute inspection. A few minutes later, the black world secrecy that had shrouded the ATF program for the past 8 years was about to be lifted. For several weeks following the successful rollout, PAV-1 was given a variety of taxi tests. During one of the very first tests, the flaps and tail surfaces automatically began to activate. The computer sensitivity was adjusted to correct this anomaly. During the taxi tests, pilot Paul Metz had his first opportunity to experience the aircraft's true capabilities. At this stage of the ATF competition, Lockheed had yet to roll out their plane, and Northrop was at last ready to fly. At 3:30 a.m. on August 27, 1990, Excited employees congregated in Hawthorne, boarded a fleet of buses in darkness, and headed out to the desert. Edwards Air Force Base, meanwhile, was a pulse of frenetic activity. Engineers, specialists, and the flight test crew were busy making final preparations for the big event. A photograph of PAV-1's first flight, proudly displaying Bob Sandusky's Black Widow signature, appeared on the cover of the next Aviation Week. In response, orders quickly came from above to have the hourglass immediately removed. As soon as the historic first flight was over, the on-ground celebrations began.
We see it get airborne. There's nothing like it. There's nothing in the world.
That was in the control room. I just could not wait. I went out of control. I want to see it fly.
On August 29, 1990, only 2 days after PAV-1's first flight, Lockheed triumphantly rolled out its YF-22. Now the contestants were dueling wing to wing. Over at Northrop, Jim Sandberg was behind the controls for the first flight of PAV-2. However, this time, an unforeseen problem occurred when the right landing gear failed to come down on the first try. After cycling it again, it deployed, and PAV-2 safely touched down without any further incidents. A month later, Lockheed flew their own airplane for the first time. The ATF competition had entered the final round. The agility, speed, and the avionics brain of the Black Widow 2 met the government requirements. The Pentagon's 10-to-1 force multiplier became a reality. For the record, the unclassified official top speed of the Black Widow 2 at Supercruise was nearly Mach 1.5 without afterburner, and Mach 1.8 at maximum power. Any speed above that remains classified. Other performance details are still, to this day, highly classified. Perhaps the ultimate satisfaction for the team occurred when PAV-1 and PAV-2 made their momentous formation flight. PAV-1 and its flight test crew now faced one of their biggest challenges, an exercise known as Surge Day. From dawn until dusk, 6 separate sorties were conducted. On April 23, 1991, the Pentagon made the decisive telephone call, identifying which company would recoup their $650 million investment. Soon after the announcement was made, the YF-23 Black Widow 2 program was dissolved, along with the hopes and dreams of the Northrop and McDonnell Douglas team that had worked on it. The classified components of PAV-1 and PAV-2, the engines and instruments, were removed, the interiors disemboweled and sealed by the Air Force. All that remained were the empty shells, waiting to be destroyed for the sake of secrecy by their creators. In winning their respective contracts, Lockheed and Pratt & Whitney would continue the development and production of their YF-22, which would lead to the production F-22 Raptor. But, ironically, the Cold War became an issue of the past. The threat that was there when the effort first started was gone. As for PAV-1 and PAV-2, they remained at Edwards Air Force Base for 5 years. Anonymous icons to a lost government contract. Desert denizens collecting dust and memories. Because man and machine have, for centuries, shared an indomitable spiritual connection. On one memorable morning in 1995, a team traveled to Edwards Air Force Base to bring PAV-2 back home for restoration. Upon its arrival back in Hawthorne, California, PAV-2 was restored to its former glory by some of the original team who built her. Ironically, the restoration occurred in the same hangar building in which she was first built. PAV-2 can be viewed at the Western Museum of Flight in Torrance, California. PAV-1 is displayed permanently at the National Museum of the U.S. Air Force in Dayton, Ohio. The history of aviation is written by the winners, But sometimes, the most captivating stories belong to those who showed us a different future. The YF-23 was more than just an aircraft. It was a glimpse into an alternate timeline, a bold declaration of what was possible. Today, the engines are cold, and the canopy collects dust. But for those who built it, and for those who see it now, it will never be just a machine. It is a masterpiece of design, a vessel of dreams, and a silent echo of a powerful roar that once owned the desert sky. A legend, not of what was, but of everything that could have been.